So what I worked on today was creating the backdrop and the imagery on the backdrop for our set piece. So as we have the kitchen in the front with the moving parts, we then have the garden behind that, which will come forwards, and then behind that we have the backdrop, which will hide the wall of the theatre. So what we wanted for the image on the back of, well, on the backdrop was to have it look as Swansea was after it had been bombed. So broken houses, smoke, and quite grey. And as we don't have a lot of time for this project, and we also don't have a lot of time left, we wanted to cover as much as we could with some pieces of brick that we found. So to do this, we got out the brick and I drew around it in different places and came up with places of where they would each sit. And then I labelled each piece of brick and labelled it on the back of the set so I could then match them up and know where I wanted each piece of brick to go, as otherwise I'd have to hold them all on as I was doing it. And then I then had a choice as to either staple the bricks onto the set piece and then paint underneath it, or to paint and then staple the bricks on. And I decided to go with the latter, as it means that I wouldn't run the risk of getting paint all over the bricks, and it would be a lot easier and I believe quicker to do the painting first and then put the bricks on. So after I'd drawn around them and labelled them all, I put them in a pile off to the side and I mixed up a light grey to paint in the gaps as just like a basis and a way to start. So if any bits don't get covered, then they've still got the grey, so it's not that obvious. As both of the flats were yellow and pink, which are quite different colours to what we're going for. They're all right as an undertone, but it's not something we really want on show. And so once I had mixed up and used a paint roller to put down that first layer of grey, I then started going in with a brush to try and create some houses and the bombed houses and like remnants of what was left over after it happened, and smoke and debris and just bits and parts everywhere. I did this in grayscale, partly because it would have cost a lot to get the paint to match all of the colours that would have been there, and also as it was so smoky, I think grey works for this, and it was a lot simpler and I believe faster to paint working with just black and white and the greys that come in the spectrum between those two colours. And I tried to have it quite loose, um, as there was quite a lot of going on. I wanted it to be quite textural and be more movement based rather than focusing on so much the detail of the image. So I used quite loose brush strokes and just tried to get as much texture as I could in there as possible, while pulling some details through further with darks and lights, trying to use highlights to pull out maybe windows or doors and little parts just to show that it's houses. I had to make sure when I was doing it that I continued took steps back and took in the image as a whole, rather than being close up and sort of getting lost in the smaller parts. As the actual painting itself now, when you're close to it, it doesn't look like a lot. You can't really see what it's supposed to be, but when you step back and stand where the audience is how I want you to be able to see it. And if I get too into the detail, then it won't have the right impression for the audience. It's more important the image looks better further away than it does closer up. And then after I'd done that, I had to stop for a little while, as Liam and Dylan, who were working on rigging the lights, needed to be in the place where I was. So I moved out of the way, and during that time I helped Grace, who was on set dressing, to help her attach the dado rail. We did this by using a sealant, and I helped her hold it in place as she put it on, and then we taped it down to try and keep it secure as it dried so we could move on to doing the other ones. after I'd done that and they had finished rigging the lights where I needed to be, I got Grace to help me staple the bricks onto the flat where I had uh, previously decided on where they were going using the letters and numbers that I had coded on the thing to match them to where they were supposed to be. We used a staple gun for this as we held them in place and then stapled them to where they needed to be. With one of them, it was maybe not the best idea to have used a staple gun as it cracked quite a lot when the staples went in and was quite fragile. So I think we may have benefited more from choosing a different method of attaching that one, but it is staying on so far, so we don't need to go over it. What I think we could have done, what I think I could have done better today was taken pictures of the placement of each brick panel on the flat, as well as having the numbers and letters that correlated to each other and were the same, as it would have meant that I wouldn't have to keep lifting them up and putting them on just to check the size and the shape, as I could just check the photo. As sometimes I would go over the edge of what I'd drawn out just because I didn't want that peeking through if it was big enough, and then picking up to test how big it actually was quite inconvenient and time consuming, and if I just had a photo that would have eliminated that, I believe. Something else I would have done better is that looking at the bricks now, some of the placement is rather odd, and some of them are high up, and it seems as though they are floating or suspended in it. There's nothing holding them down. I would have put more bricks at the bottom of the flat and less at the top, as it makes more sense as to how they would have been built, and it's more realistic. The bricks themselves, we wanted it to be like it's the walls going out in people's gardens. So there's lots of different textures of brick, as this was what we had to hand, but we decided that we could make it work as it's like this is one garden and this is another. They are two different ones, but because this wall is broken, this one is now being shown behind it. But I'm not sure the placement tells that as well as it could. So if I were to do this again, I'd definitely maybe spend a bit more time and maybe draw up some pictures first of the placement of each of them to really try and get the best of what we could have done for that. What went well though is I'm quite happy with the outcome and how it looks. I think it is very much what I was intending. I did use some references, visual references to help me, and I think that was very helpful in getting that right outcome of the overall impression of what I was trying to put across. So I think that made it a lot easier.